Okay, so it's 2:30 and I'm going to go ahead and start, and maybe people will shuffle in, maybe they won't. I guess we'll see. So, before we get started with today's lecture kind of stuff, I wanted to kind of let you guys know that there's a couple of things that you might take a look at. There are 2 extra credit assignments. One is due relatively soon, and it closes relatively soon as well. And that's for the GameSim game. They're actually asking for testers to come in and play it, and it actually is on itch.io. So you come in here, they've got a download link, but they've also got this link here that is a form so that you fill it out. And basically, all I want is like a screenshot of your answers, or a screenshot that you submitted it, or just a screenshot. Or you can copy your answers and kind of give them to me as well. I have nothing to do with GameSim this semester, but this is extra credit. It will replace a discussion board thing, so if you've missed a game check, or if you haven't done a tutorial or answered an article kind of stuff, I'll replace the entire grade with this, just showing me this. So easy peasy, it's really helpful for them. Yeah, it's really helpful for them. So, on top of that, there is another extra credit down here. This one was planned, this one just came up. I didn't realize that they were doing their presentations about it today. So, yeah. So this one, you do have a lot longer. I don't think it closes until the end of November, yeah. And basically, what I want you to do is find a game jam on itch.io that looks like a jam that you would actually enjoy doing. And I'm not asking you to do it. Okay, let me put that out there. I'm not asking you to do it. I'm not asking you to join the jam. What I'm asking you to do is to basically write me a page, so that's a full page, on if you were to do this jam, how would you do it? Or what would you want to do for it? And you got to take into consideration things like the amount of time that jam has, how many people would you have in a team, do you fit their themes, and yeah, I'll tack on a letters grade worth of points to an assignment, but also I will replace a discussion board thing if you've got one of those missed for all the points. So if you come into here, and itch.io is a great place to actually do jams, and if you're like, yeah, but I don't like working on my own, or I don't think I could do it on my own, most jams have kind of a group finder thing, which is really cool. And some jams are things like 3-hour jams, so you literally build a game in 3 hours. Some of them are more extended, so like an average jam is somewhere between 24 and 72 hours. Thereabouts. 36 hours tends to be a pretty sweet spot for them. But you'll also find jams that go on for a month or 2 months. So don't think that jam means that it has to be super simple and short. But there's going to be a lot of cool ones in here, and some of them may be things that you really like. You jam with like full core game jam, like that one sounds pretty cool. Choose your own Halloween. Yeah, a lot of them are going to be Halloween based if you're looking at October, but you can 100% kind of scroll over and look through November or anything else you want to do. Look for game jams, because some of the jams that will be in here will not be game jam specific. They'll be art jams or board game jams or things like monetization challenges. So look for actual kind of game jams. But so you'll see there's some of them have beginner jams, some of them have things like C# jam. Um, so just find things that look good to you. Yeah. So basically that's all you do for that, is that you just write me up, like a one pager, what you would want to do, how you would do it. And like I said, there are tons and tons of them. You can explore them by all sorts of different things. They have some that they always feature up at the top. So just have fun with it. And I'm not telling you to do any specific one. I'm just saying, because just find one that you find that's pretty cool. The movie jams tend to be kind of fun to do. We've done those a couple times. So, yeah. So, okay. So those are the 2 extra credits. Like I said, the GameSim one is due, like, soon. This one you have all of November that you can actually do. They've got they have due dates November 11th and November 13th, but this one is open all the way through November. I keep wanting to say January. Wow. Thinking way far ahead there. So the other thing that I want to mention is, please guys, you know how to build a project. I want just your build, not your project files, not any of your project files, to be entirely honest. I just want the build and the extra files that go with the exe. You know, I need the full build. And just a plain exe is not going to work. I need the exe, the other exe, the few other things that build with it. I need all of those things to run your exes. So, yeah. And if you haven't gotten a grade on your task list at this point, or something that you had to put up on Trello, look at the assignment, see if I've left a comment, because most of the ones that I haven't graded, it's because your boards are private and I can't actually view them. So, okay, so let's talk about terrain today. So we're going to be looking at this one right here, and there is a good chance that I'm going to start sounding like a robot or something is going to lag out, so just let me know if that happens. Like I said last class, terrain is very, very heavy on your system. My system is older. Okay, my desktop is older. My laptop runs it without a problem, but it's a pain in the butt to try and teach this class on a laptop with one small screen. As it is with my desktop, I use 3 screens to teach this class, just because I can. So my desktop can run it, doesn't have a problem, but it may have a problem with this idea, the fact that I'm recording, which I hope I started my recording. Okay, cool, yeah, I did. With recording and streaming and running it. So this is also the number one thing, other than over flooding your lights or putting things into Unity that are, you know, millions upon millions of polys, that will crash Unity and your computer. So be aware of that. Keep an eye on the temperature on your computer. And I mean literally, like, if you've got a laptop, feel it. If it feels way too hot, just kind of back off for a little bit, put a fan under it, make sure that it's got airflow to it, because terrain can be extremely heavy. That being said, it's relatively easy to do, but it's yeah, you're making a full terrain, like you're making a full world basically. So it can get pretty, it's on par with ZBrush for a lot of things. Actually, for those of you who are used to ZBrush, this is going to feel a lot like ZBrush, or Sculptris, or even sort of sculpting in Maya and Blender, but yeah. So okay, so in the tutorial, I mentioned standard assets. And if you look at Unity right now, there is at the Unity store, so if we, because I can never remember the Unity store, asset store. They keep changing what they call it. There is a standard asset pack, but it's not the standard asset pack that they used to have. Cool. Standard assets. So they do have this standard, is it this one? Yeah. They do have this standard asset pack, which they may or may not let you actually have. It depends. That being said, it doesn't contain everything that it used to contain. However, it does contain a first-person character controller, a third-person character controller, a car controller, an aircraft controller, for those of you that are still struggling with getting those to work or don't want to code it yourself. They have it. Please use it. You all know me. My opinion is work smarter and not harder. So yeah. So they've got camera rigs, they have a couple of extra things in there. Rollerball, a couple of you are doing ball things. So yeah. So yeah. And they should all work within the 2020 version. I haven't really tested them, which I probably should have. But what used to come inside of standard asset was a bunch of other things that had to deal with terrain and water, and speed trees and things like that, and they've taken them away, which makes me really sad because they were really good. But what I have done is I've provided them both here. So if you just need water, I think it's the first one. No, it's the second one. If you just want water and you don't need any of the tree kind of things, which you may or may not want, you just need to download this one. And then you'll download it, you'll chunk it into Unity. Literally, you'll just drag, after you unzip the zip, you'll drag that folder into here, water, and you'll get a bunch of waters. There's prefabs, and that's going to be what you want to use. You'll use prefabs. There'll be multiple waters, water basic, and then one that's just called water. So, and you'll just grab the prefabs, and you'll drag it in, and rescale it to whatever you want, and you can get water. And then, yeah, when we actually come into here and we press play, the water will animate if it doesn't freak out. So yeah, easy peasy water. Again, it works. It looks pretty okay. You can actually edit all of these waves and everything to do what you want them to. That's all inside of the material for it, or the shader. So just, life is good. Life is easy. Grab those if you want them. I've also recolored it because I did. Okay, so with that said, before we get back into Unity, we're going to talk about height maps. So if you're inside of here, this is what I'm following. This is what I'm talking about. There is Polybrush, which works on your vertices, which is that kind of sculpting tool. But for much bigger kind of world experiences, the terrain editor is going to be your best friend. The terrain editor also adds a collider to itself. It has a terrain collider, so it's already set up for you to work with, which is awesome. And yeah, we're talking humongous, like, it'll make humongous things. So one of the cool things that Unity can do is that it can take a height map and change that over into raw data to like create your thing. So when I'm talking about a height map, I'm talking about things like this or like this. Now, the thing that sucks the most about it though is that Unity doesn't actually, or can't actually process it if it's a PNG or JPEG. The only way they can process the data to actually get the height map to do what it's supposed to do is if it's in a raw format, so .raw. To get a .raw, the easiest way, which may not be the easiest way for y'all, is to have Photoshop. So if you have Photoshop, once you open Photoshop, you can open the image inside of Photoshop. So I went ahead and picked this one because why not? When you go to save it out, the first thing you have to do is you have to make sure that you change this over to grayscale, and 16 bits is your best friend. So grayscale, 16 bits. And you want to discard all color data. So then when you come over here to save it, you save as. If you have an older version, it won't ask you that. If you have the new version, it will. So you put it wherever you want. And with this format, with this, especially for Unity, Unity doesn't actually require it to be inside of your Unity folder. It can call it from anywhere on your computer. However, it is smart to keep it in your Unity folder wherever your assets are. But what you want to do is you want to change this over to a Photoshop RAW, which will be a .raw. Who would have thought? And then you click save. Now, when you click save, it should pop up, if Photoshop doesn't do what it's doing, it should pop up a dialog that's going to ask you for format options. So, and this is really important because for whatever reason, 16 bits and window, there we go. So it's going to ask you whether you want to have it in a Macintosh or an IBM PC. Depending on a lot of things, depends on which one, and it's going to be a lot of trial and error. Generally Mac version works, but IBM PC tends to work a little bit better. And then you'll just save it. And that's how you get that there. And so you can make your own height map. You can literally just splotch grayscale stuff on a canvas and and make it work. Like, that's what this other one that I have, this one, was done. This one's just somebody with a brush went in and they blotched stuff together to make what they consider a low poly. And you're going to see that there are going to be differences because, like, this one's going to have a lot of, like, little craggly bits. And we'll see that in a minute. And you don't have to use a height map. Like, don't think that me saying, oh, you know, height maps. You never have to start off with a height map. I like starting off with height maps because it auto-generates some geography for you, some topography for you, so that you don't have to do it yourself, and then you can build off of that. But that's not to say that you can't just start sculpting from a plain and do it to it. So once we've got all that saved into the raw format, and if we look over here, I can show you, I've got mine here. It's this one. I can show you, this is a bad one. This one I didn't save correctly because I didn't grayscale it out, so it doesn't even show. But, so let's go ahead and create a new scene. Wow, I had a moment. And so we've got, you know, normal Unity. Yay! Before we start anything, before we start putting terrain in, before we start doing anything at all, the first thing to do is to set up some lighting changes. And that's only because otherwise things are going to go a little crazy. And when I say crazy, I mean, again, if your computer's not smart enough, it will slow down, like, really badly. So if you don't have a lighting tab up over here, it's window, rendering, lighting. It used to be called light settings, which I think is what's in the document, but it's now just lighting. So this is where kind of like all of your lighting stuff or your lighting information is at. And sometimes you have to switch it over to say, hey, I want new lighting settings. Sometimes you can just click inside of here and it'll be happy. But the big thing that you're going to want to do right now is you want to change this over to real-time global illumination. And real-time environment lighting, like you'll see they'll come together. You want to take baked off, and you want to make sure that auto-generate is unclicked. Otherwise, this is going to try and like update your lights every 5 seconds, and while you're doing terrain, that is your worst friend, because it trying to calculate all those lights for your terrain will put such a damper on your processor that it can't do it. It just can't. Even with really great computers, it has a hard time. So those are just some quality of life things to make life easier. This is deprecated, which just means that it's no longer, or they're getting rid of it, they're changing it over to something different. But for now, this is the one we want. Yeah, so basically this is just saying, yeah, it won't be supported later. Which is fine. Like, we can keep baked on and just turn off auto generate, and that generally works. But yeah, so that's kind of my one big thing, especially when working with terrain. And then once after you're done like setting up your terrain, you turn your lights back on, you bake your lights in, so you generate, you tell it to generate the lighting. So what is baked lighting versus real time? We'll talk about lighting next week, but just as kind of a crash course, baked lighting is lighting that is literally baked in. I mean, who would have thought? What it means is that it pre-renders the lights. It says, yeah, this is where all the shadows are, this is where all the everything is, all the, you know, all the shiny parts, all the shadows, all the everything. Let me just bake that onto the texture. So let me create another layer of texture that has my shadow and my light areas. And then nothing will ever affect it. Like, we're just going to bake it on there so we don't actually have to do the calculations at that point in time for what the light actually does. And that's great because it saves on so much processing power for the player. But there's some things, of course, that you kind of need to have lighting that's happening right away. Like, so if you want your character to cast a shadow on things, they kind of have to have lighting that's going with them. But things that are like just going to be there forever and don't actually need things affected, then, you know, why not bake them? So baking is your friend. Real time is becoming more of a thing because you can do it. Because processors can handle it now, but that's not to say it's the best option. It looks pretty. Gosh, does it look pretty. But a lower system can't run it as well, and almost can't run it. So, yeah. So that's kind of my thing about that. So, how do we put a terrain in? Well, we go game object. Who would have thought? 3D object and terrain. And it's going to kind of put it wherever it decides to put it. Sometimes it'll put it like right at 0, 0. Sometimes it decides to put it in some weird places. So once you're in this terrain, it's just a plain old thing. And you've got these buttons here. And these buttons are how we're actually going to do everything. But first, I'm going to show you how to use the height map. And then we'll talk about how to use the actual like sculpting tools. So as you can see, if we click this little gear, that's your terrain settings, there are a ton of options. And we're just going to kind of ignore all of them until we get down to here, where it says import raw. This is where we import our raw file. So in this case, I've already got it plugged in right here. And it's going to auto kind of say, hey, I know the resolution is that, but do you want me to change the sizing on it? And I know, did I make the, let's see. I don't remember whether I made the byte order Mac or Windows for this one. I guess we'll see. So you can tell it, yeah, I want to downsize this from 4096 to 1000 by 1000, or maybe you want to make it bigger, and this is meters, so it's 1000 by 1000 meters, which is very big. So we can say, hey, yeah, import it. And it'll do its thinking, and it comes in! You know, perfect. We're done, right? Like, this looks absolutely beautiful. No, it does not. And the reason why it looks like this is because of our height data. So what we have said, and when I set it up, we set it up to say that, hey, the top height is 600. But that's not really what we want. What we want instead is to kind of fiddle with this number until we get it to look like what we want it to look like. So let's take it down by half and see whether that fixes that. So that looks a little bit better. Again, we still need a little bit more because this looks very craggly. So maybe we'll go down to 150. And okay, that looks, you know, marginally better. That'll work for what we're doing. For now, that'll work. And so we talk about how each one of these squares is a meter, generally. Well, that's not true when we're zoomed out this far. When we kind of start to come in, you're going to start seeing squares inside of squares. So if you actually really want to see how big this terrain is compared to like an actual Unity meter, if we come in and we add a 3D object and add a cube, which for whatever reason it does this every time, it comes in at a weird place after you put a terrain in. So now our cube is at 0, 0, 0. If we press W, you can see it's at this little corner. That's a Unity cube. So that's the size. And if we really want to see, a human is about 2 meters tall. If you're talking a human, we're talking about that size. So you can see just how big and how monumental this terrain is. And you can always make it bigger. You can always make this terrain bigger or smaller, depending on how you've set the, like, we set it to 1000 by 1000, but we could make it 4096 by 4096, or bigger than that. So this is, you can see how this is, like, really easy and fast to create, like, an entire environment to go behind you, or to walk on. So, and that's pretty cool, because, like, if we come in here, you can see we've got a terrain collider. so you can actually walk already on top of this and everything. So it's pretty cool. And if you paint in trees, it actually has tree colliders on it too as well, so it makes your life super nice. Okay, so let's come back in here and let's look at a couple more of these things. So you're going to see that there's a couple other things that are talking about detail resolution per patch. Basically, if you hover over any of these, it'll kind of tell you what it is. You generally don't have to worry about detail resolution and detail resolution per patch, at least not for now. The ones that you're wanting to worry about are these width, length, and height. And that's how you'll get kind of things to be a little bit better. Like, this still may not be perfect. I'm not so keen on the way that these mountains are all super spiky. But once you get this as a base, you can 100% go in and fix this. So that's what the sculpting tools and everything are for. Let me make sure I haven't skipped over anything. Okay, so yeah, so now we've kind of, height map, easy peasy, it's created kind of a basis. Now we want to actually paint on it. Now, the issue here is, well, okay, let's talk about that button first. So, you can actually do multiple tiles of terrain. And what you can do is if you click this one that says create neighbor terrains, it'll bring up this and it says, hey, where do you want to create me? So maybe I want to create it here. It'll think about it, it'll do its thing, it'll create it. What's cool is if you actually have something that butts up against here, so if we come over here, and if I paint, let's see, let's come over here. If I paint over here, that's what I want. If I paint over here, so right along this edge, what it's going to do is it's going to try and bridge. So if we click here, see how it tried? It'll try and bridge, it'll try and make a continuous thing. So this is pretty cool to use too if you need something bigger than this. I'm not going to ask you to make anything bigger, because unless you want to, like, it's up to you. Okay, so we're back to our standard one. So that's kind of what that button does. The one thing that you got to remember is that when you're talking about here, you've got this grouping ID. If this tile, if this tile and then the tile next to it have a different grouping ID, they're not considered part of the same terrain range. So they won't actually connect, or they'll move independent of each other, which can be nice, but can also be problematic depending on what you're trying to do. Okay, so now that we have all of that done, the best thing to do next is to actually import the terrain tools. So to do that, we go to Window, Package Manager, and I've already got them installed only because this is the one that takes like 8 years to install. So you come over here, you go to Unity Registry, you make sure that you have Enable Preview Packages on, and you come down to Terrain Tools, and you'll have to import it. Then you'll download the asset pack, asset sample from the asset store. You'll click that. It'll make you sign in over here. You'll tell it to download. Then you'll tell it to open in Unity. You'll tell it to open in the Unity blah blah blah. Then you'll come back over into here. It'll open up a new portion here. And then you'll have to import here as well. This will just tell me that I've already got them imported. Should tell me I already have them imported. And then you'll tell it to import again. And so that'll give you a bunch of things like different textures to paint and some brushes, a few other things that make your life so much better. Okay, cool. Why are we taking this long? But it'll make your life so much better to have this pack of stuff. It makes making terrains easier and painting terrains easier because it includes snow, grass, scree, dirt, sand, and moss as like the textures that it's got. Um, okay, why? Why are you taking a minute to tell me that I already have all this stuff in here? Okay, whatever. So it's got that, plus it's got some extra tools, some extra brushes that are specifically designed to mimic real world like geography stuff. So it's got some little crevices and some mound breaks and some things like that. But it's also got some other fun brushes. Like, yeah, you've got some standard brushes that come in here, but these brushes are better. There we go. See, like I said, nothing to import. But basically, it'll have another import button. You'll click OK, and it'll import even more. So it takes forever. But this is also, as a side note, where anything that you've set up to kind of like have, it will have that for you here. So anything that you've purchased in quotation marks or that you've gotten for free from the Unity Asset Store will always be available in your packages my assets. So yeah, you can see I've got lots of skyboxes, which we will talk about. I think next week we'll talk about that. So okay, so now that we've got all that going, we can come over to this button that says Paint Terrain. Now, painting terrain has another little drop down next to it that's going to have this idea of sculpting, effects, erosion, mesh stamp. Raise and lower terrain is going to be the one that you're going to use the most often. It's going to be left click to raise the terrain. It's going to be control and left click to lower, but you've got to have something that's going to be like that you can lower. So this is considered the lowest point, so we have to pick something that's like above it to lower it. So we can see these mountains starting to disappear, you know. So we can do something like that. And then the shift key will start to smooth things out. So like I said, those of you guys who are used to ZBrush or had your ZBrush class already, this is going to seem kind of similar. So, and this is also where I can get rid of all that ugly little craggly bits that I didn't like, that I was like, about. So you can get this to be more smooth to start with, and then once we actually paint on textures, we can actually, paint on textures. And now, I'm not doing this how I would usually do it as far as making it look nice or anything like that. I'm just, because I just want this to be quick and a demo for you guys to see how it works. So, and again, you can actually use a stylus to do this if you have a stylus and that's your jam. But it's easy to do with mouse and keys. So yeah, you can already see how that actually looks better. It looks more walkable. It looks like our character's not actually going to get stuck inside of things. So yeah. So that's kind of how that works. And you can use any of these brushes. So, like, say we want to build a star out here. We can build some stars. We could also come in and build like this one, which is kind of like this weird tortoiseshell thing. You can kind of start doing that. If you press the S key and you drag your mouse left or right, up or down, not so much, left or right, will make your brush bigger or smaller. But like I said, you've got some cool like craggly bits, like that's pretty cool. If we press Control, well, let's press S and make this bigger. And we press Control, we can actually make kind of this cool little divot-y thing. So you can make some cool things in these brushes that are already made. And yeah, you can technically import your own brushes as well, but not as much. I mean, for some people it's worth it. For this assignment, for this class, I don't know that it's going to be worth it for you, so just note. And then you can change the size and the strength and everything down here. If you guys are used to Substance Painter, it kind of works the same way as that. So now instead of getting those like super mounds, we're getting soft little pieces. You can have a jitter, which means to just like randomly how random do you want the positioning, so you can see how it's rotating different ways. And that gives us a little bit more of an organic feel. And then you've got spacing, which again, that's for if you start dragging your mouse like that, like how much spacing is it going to have. So if we like make that space, and if we scatter it, it'll make it not go in like a straight line. So you can see it started putting them in really weird places. We just can't see where they're all going, because you can see some of them are going over here, some went over there, one went there, one went there. Whereas if we take that scatter down, it's still going in the same kind of straight line, but it's now trying to randomize, but not being super random. But yeah, so there's a whole bunch of really cool, actual, look like real kind of earth patterns built into these brushes if you download that terrain tool pack. And it'll auto install them for you and everything, so it's not something that you have to like drag and drop anywhere or do anything for. So on top of this kind of stuff, the raise and lower terrain, you have this idea of painting holes. You can paint texture, which we'll talk about in a minute. Transforming, again, if you're used to this kind of stuff, it'll tell you click to pinch the terrain, and it'll start pinching. It only sort of does it well. I'm not a huge fan of these guys. So just note that there's a lot of tools that you can play around with. But one other one that a lot of people really like to use is the erosion tool. And this is great when you're trying to get up and close, like close details, like say here we want kind of this area to look like it's eroded, and you can see where it's building in that erosion down here. And it has different patterns for, you know, how would this actually erode if water hit it or if wind hit it, which is the difference. Hydraulic is going to be, erodes the terrain according to a fluid simulation. So, and it's going to be different depending on a lot of things actually. If you put it down a side, different things like that. So we may or may not see it here. But you can definitely see it once you get down close. But you've got hydraulic, you have thermal. So hydraulic is water, thermal is heat. So it's from the freezing and thawing process, and sometimes it's also great to use for like volcanoes. And again, you have to find a brush that you really like for this. It's not always the best kind of like, oh, this brush will work. Nah, sometimes it's literally that you got to figure out like which brush is going to be the brush that's going to do the best kind of stuff. So the one that I like, of course, to do is going to be the hydraulic one. That's the one I like to do the most because I do a lot of coastline kind of stuff. And then the other one is wind. So which way is the wind pointing? Like you can see, it'll show you which way the wind is pointing, how the wind is pointing. And so you can see it's gonna like erode in that kind of pattern of the way that that wind is pointing. So maybe, you know, we can say that the wind gets caught in here and we get that erosion. So, and then once we start doing that, you can see we're starting to build up where I smoothed all that out. We're starting to also add in some more kind of erosion, some more realistic feeling to the way that this would be. Realistic in quotation marks, because we have a giant star kind of thing. So the other one is that you have stamp terrain. And stamp terrain kind of works a little bit differently insofar as it's like, hey, what height do you want me? It's just one stamp. So it's just, hey, you want this, you want it to look like that, how high do you want me to be? Cool, stamp me. And it just stamps. So this again works really well with these kinds of things because they're kind of built in to be like that. So, and again, you can start out with a base plane, build up as much as you want, and then cut and do everything you want out of it. So it's not something that you like have to start with a height map. And you can see it can get crazy, it can be really simple, it can be whatever you want it to be. So far, does this kind of make sense? cool. Because this one's a lot of fun. Like, I don't get to use it as often as I would like to. But it is super fun. But I always, like, my poor desktop. Because the other part with my desktop is, like, it's missing half its components right now because I'm building a new system. So I basically pulled the stuff that I don't absolutely have to have inside of it to put into the new system, but then things happen, so I'm waiting on parts for the new system, so I'm kind of running on, yeah, not a happy system, but I can always hear my fan going angry at me, but it's so much fun, and it's really relaxing. It's the same reason why I like using ZBrush and things like that is because I find sculpting very relaxing. Same way with Substance Painter. I find Substance Painter extremely relaxing as well. But so once we have like all of this, the next thing that we gotta do is paint it, right? Like, this is perfect. This is like the masterpiece of the universe. This, will sell for millions of dollars and work beautifully inside of a game. Said no one ever. We gotta paint it. And painting's actually just as easy as it is to do any of this kind of stuff. So when you come in here, we saw it earlier, we had this whole paint texture. Now it's going to say, hey, add a material layer to use on the terrain. Left click to paint the selected materials, hold shift, blah, 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 blah. Because like right now, it's not going to actually paint anything. And it's like, well, that sucks. How do I actually give it stuff to paint? Now this is where, again, those terrain tools actually make a lot of sense. Because what you have to do is you actually have to physically add them in here. So you have to say, hey, layer palette thing down here, I want to add a layer to you. And it will auto pop up with the stuff you can use. These are all the things that we downloaded with those terrain tools. Dirt, moss. Now the thing that sucks is you can't say, grab all of them. You have to do it one at a time. So we'll grab the dirt, and you're going to see it automatically puts the dirt down. So it automatically gives it a base texture. And you can already see how much better this looks, how kind of cool this looks. And all of this extra scraggly bits is a normal map. For those of you who know what that is, it's just an added fake texture. For those of you that don't, we'll talk about that next week. I think it's next week. I'm pretty sure I do lighting and texturing in the same week. I could be wrong. So then we add another layer. We say we want moss. And then we add another layer. Say we want rock. And add another layer and say we want sand. Add another layer, say we want scree, which is the funnest word in the world to say. And then we add another layer and say we want snow. So now we've got all of these in here. So now we can actually say, hey, I want to paint with this moss texture. I want to paint with the moss texture. This one. Oh, because my brushes are set up to have a low strength. Okay. So I want to paint with moss. So you can see, maybe you can't. That's different. Let's pick one that's like actually different. Rock. So you can see it's now painting this kind of rock pattern. Now again, this is looking really huge, right? There's a couple of different ways that you can actually fix this. Now, maybe huge for you is good. Maybe huge for you is not. The other reason why we do it this way instead of using what we would normally think of for painting is because this actually has a special shader on it and built into it so that we can have that texture mixing. So texture mixing is actually a pain in the butt as far as shaders go, but this actually uses a special shader. So yeah, so this texture is looking really big. Like, that looks really giant. So a couple different ways that we can fix that. So we can come down here into our layer property and you can actually change the tiling settings. So maybe you want it to be, I don't know, 10 by 10. And you can already see how that's made that much smaller. You can see how that's made that much smaller. Or, instead of doing it that way, you could also make your terrain bigger. And that's, again, just like how we were talking earlier, we come into settings and you mess with these numbers, these 1000 by 1000. The one thing you have to remember is that you have to actually mess with your terrain height as well. So if we set this to 2000 by, not 200, 2000, 2000 by 2000, you're going to see all of a sudden this seems like really, really flat. We lose a lot of the stuff that we had. And the reason why is because our height is still the same. So we have to also double that to 300, and you're going to see things are going to pop back up where they were. So you can also do it that way. And then you're going to see that this kind of stayed the same, but when you come back over to painting, it's going to be a little bit smaller. Again, it's not unheard of for people to just like work on these things at like a 10,000 by 10,000 before they kind of say, yeah, it's done, and then like smush it. But the best and easiest way, honestly, is to come into your palette down here and kind of change the tilings. Like, that's honestly the best thing. And you can see all this is it's a diffuse, a normal map, and a mask map. Yeah. So you can actually like copy these and go in and change them if you want to. And you can find other terrain packs. So if like these aren't working for you, yeah. You can also just kind of like shove a texture on top of the entire terrain if you really want to. It's kind of up to you. And you can use, again, whichever brush you feel like using. Like if you want to put stars down here, you want to make, you know, the mountains graffitied, go right ahead. So it can give you some really cool kind of pattern things. Like, as you've probably noticed, especially when we like downsized this, the one downfall is that there's not a lot of randomization in the way that the texture's laid down. So the way to break that up is to get another texture to kind of layer on top of it to kind of give it a little bit more of randomization. Supposedly that's the next big thing that's coming, and it's one of the things that Unreal definitely has a better grasp on, is how to make your kind of terrain textures more randomized. But for now, this works. You know, this works. So the next question that you probably all have, because that's pretty much all I have to say about this, honestly, is gonna be, you know, well, how do I put trees and stuff onto it? How do I put grass onto it? How do I do this and that and t'other? That's all inside of this whole kind of tree things. Click to paint a tree. Hold shift. Click to paint a tree. Now the problem is that we don't have any trees. So what you have to do is you have to say, hey, edit the trees, and then add a tree, and then you have to find tree prefabs. So some of the stuff, the speed trees that I have in here may or may not work anymore. Yeah, okay, so we can say, hey, yeah, I've got these trees right here, so let's add this guy. So add him in. And then you're just going to paint to add trees. So now we have a giant, super dense forest here. Whereas you can also, you know, set the density down. You can change how random they are. You can change the color variation. You can change the size, like all of that jazz. So maybe we want to make a forest all over here, or add trees like that. So this is also how you can add in grass and things like that, but that generally tends to be painting in your details. And detail patching will get smaller, so if you want to add detail objects, that's how you would do it here. But for the most part, you're going to stick with these three kind of things. So you can also, again, you can find grass inside of the asset store. And there's also tutorials for making grass and things like that. So it just kind of depends on how you want to do it. And yeah, so you can control and click to erase trees. And yeah, so that's how you get wonderful little tree friends. And you can see how tall they are compared to the mountains, so you can kind of figure out whether your mountains are a good size or not. Yeah. Yeah. So, super easy. And you can define any object in this kind of paint tree thing, so if we go in and we add, let's see, what do I have in here? Let me grab, let's see, what projects do I have that are easy to get to? Okay, that one might work. Okay, let's try that one. So if we drag this, I'm gonna just drag this into my textures. Don't pull a me, do a smart thing, not a me thing. So I haven't set up the textures or anything on that, so we're just gonna, but we'll use it. We can use it. I can show you how we can use it. And it's gonna tell you, hey, it needs to have this extra shader, otherwise lighting won't work correctly. But it should still let you do it. So we are now going to say, let's see the brush size, let's make it small, let's make it super dense. Let's find a spot. And are they too small to actually be seen? That's another thing. It may also be because it may also be because of this shader. Let's see here. So basically, the point is that you can add just about anything in as long as it's got the right shader and stuff. This is probably painting somewhere stupid, or it's like super small or super giant. Let's see. Model. Let's not convert it. Apply. No, we're not going to paint it. Okay. We are going to paint that. We're not going to paint that. Selected. Yeah. So basically, it has to do with the shader more than anything else. But so you can put in a bunch of other things as long as you add in something that, like, when you make the materials. So this material right here, if we create a new material, create material, and we change it over to this nature. What did it want us to use? Soft occlusion. Okay, cool. Let's just use that. Changes to this kind of thing. Okay, cool. Then we assign this to her. Okay, this is barbarian. Materials. Material. This should work. This should work. We're gonna see. Oh yeah, you can see where she's like now coming in like crazy little people. So yeah. So you kind of have to make some funky little changes, but you can use just about anything you want. So okay. Are there any questions about terrain? I guess water. So like I said, I have that pack of water for you guys to like drag in. I highly suggest it, and it'll come in a folder called water. You just shove it in your assets. My favorite to use is definitely these ones that are either the advanced or this pro nighttime, pro daytime kind of thing. And basically you just drag this in here and it'll come in somewhere. Oh, it's over there. And it'll come in very small. Now, you don't have to like tile it 100 times. You just have to tell it that you want to make it bigger. And you can just loop. And then loop, loop. And then you can see that the issue right now is that it's kind of in the same spot as the bottom of our ground. So you just move it up a little bit. And suddenly we've got, you know, crystal clear water, which may or may not be what you want, so you can actually go in and mess with the settings for this. Like you can look at this kind of water script that they've got, but they've also got a couple other things like the material here. So if you come into here, you can say, maybe I want a different normal map or different color. So let's, you know, make it bright pink, which may or may not show up on this specific one. So it just kind of depends on a lot of different things. But so there's this one. And again, this one I'm pretty sure, main camera, let's see. So if you find a view that you like I kind of actually like this view. If you come into game objects and you click align with view, your camera will go to what you're looking at, which makes it great for this assignment, or for what your assignment is with this. Because what you're going to do is you're going to actually set up like your camera and your view where you want it, like different parts that you think are really cool. And you're going to take a couple screenshots for me. So literally what you're going to do for that is you're going to tell it that you want it to maximize on play, or I mean, I guess you don't really have to tell it to maximize on play. But if you come into this game tab and you tell it maximize on play, it's going to get as big as it can. And then you can click play. Okay, so this is the water that doesn't animate. But basically, then you can take whatever you want. My preference is this one, which is Snip and Sketch if you're on PC. If you're on Mac, I don't actually know what your Snip and Sketch is called anymore. But basically, you click it, and it'll give you a marquee kind of selection. So you can marquee select what you want, and then it'll pop up over here, and you can save your image. Or you can print screen, or you can however you want to do it. But what you're going to do is you're going to make me a couple screenshots. You don't have to have water, you don't have to have trees. I just want a terrain. Something that you think looks cool. If you're wanting to do other waters, do other waters. If you want to do, you know, maybe you like this water better. Scene. I can never remember quite which water it is that I like the best. Until I try them out. Because, again, the way that the company that I work with, or the studio that I work with, we tend to write our own waters. So, is it this one? It's this one. This is the one that I'm using currently that's got that cool animation already built into it that I've changed the color to look like cherry Kool-Aid. Because it 100% doesn't look like blood. It looks like cherry Kool-Aid. But yeah, so these are all there for you. So this is the Water for Advanced. That's the one that I like. So the issue with doing underwater, you could 100% do that. The problem is that underwater doesn't always work like it's supposed to. So let's press delete on this guy. Like you could 100% say, you know, I want to do this underwater, but you don't always get to see, or it doesn't always get to look quite underwater. So let me see if I can get this set up. And I can show you what the problem is. And again, I could just put this value into what I know it's going to be. But that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, so the issue with underwater is that it basically it ignores the light, so it just kind of looks normal, for lack of a better term. You could 100% probably fake it, but you could also take a picture if you wanted to, like this, where you just have all this water and just this tiny bit of land. But you can see how it doesn't really kind of give you any extra added anything. Like 100%, you could probably change the way that the lighting works, which is a side note. If you guys do, you can change the light color. That's the first one that's like easy to do. So maybe you would do something like that to get things to look bluer or purpler. But the other one to do would be to change the way that your skybox looks. Which, if you come over to here where it says environmental, you have this idea of a skybox. You can change your shadow color here. But since we're not casting shadows because we're not actually doing any kind of lighting stuff, it's not really going to be helpful. And we have this default skybox right now. But what you can do is you can actually, and I'll go over this, I really think it's next week. I could be wrong. And then inside of wherever I have this at, I'm just going to put it in textures. You could make your own skybox. So it would be create, and it would be a material. So as you can see, we've got shaders, but it would be down here under material. And if you click into here and come back into your inspector, you can switch this over to a skybox. And this is where you can actually put in HDRs and things like that. Those of you guys who are used to HDRIs or like actual sky maps, you can do that there. But you can also do procedural or panoramic. And if we talk about procedural, you can do sky tints and things like that. You can do a few other things with skyboxes. You can panoramic, cube map, six-sided. You can do a few things with that. And we'll talk a little bit about these next week because they're kind of important and fun to use. But so procedural tends to be the one that most people want to use. We can tint the sky to match what we want, and we can tint the ground to kind of be blue. And then you can see up here in the preview, but if we come back over into here, we can tell it to take this skybox instead. So you'd have to do a lot of tricking to get it to look more underwater than anything else. But you could if you really wanted to. Sorry, I guess that was like a really, really long-winded version. You can also come over here into environment where it says like the lighting. And you can either take the kind of the skybox, or you can tell it to kind of, you know, how you want it to do different things. You can mess with a lot of things in skyboxes. Skyboxes are a lot of fun to play around with as well. Let's do this. That color? Yeah. So you can do something like that, which again will give you even more depth. Have fun with it. Yeah. Literally the next couple of kind of assignments are going to be have fun with it. I mean, I hope every assignment for y'all is have fun with it. Yeah, 100%. Depending on how you want to do it, and or you can do your intensity kind of things. Depends on how kind of strong and everything it is. But again, right now the biggest problem is because we're not baking any lighting. It's not really like talking about how strong or how great it is. If we come into our directional light, which is our sun, you can tell it to have a higher intensity, and that'll get it to be super bright. And you can change like the shadows and stuff like that. So yeah, you can do a lot of things with it. Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions? Wants, desires, needs about terrains? So, the actual assignment that I'm asking you guys to do when it comes to this, again, I give you a couple more terrain tips and making terrains kind of thing. If you feel like watching them, if you're like excited about them, I love them. So you're gonna build me a terrain. And actually, I'm probably going to remove this one, and I'm just going to make you push stuff into the terrain talks. So, actually, I should do that right now. But basically, what you're going to do is embed your screenshots in this post. I'll go and edit this so that it actually reads like it should. Let me do that right now while we're talking about it. Different tournament. Unpublish. No. Okay, modules. Okay, so yeah, basically, you're going to build me a terrain. You can either use height mapping, just the terrain, painting, a combo, water foliage is optional. Take 3 screenshots at different angles. It could be the entire thing from a high view. It could be, like I said, a close-up view or an angle that you really like. It could be anything that you think looks exciting or is fun. So I'm not going to ask you to turn in your Unity projects to me. I'm just going to ask you to put your screenshots up. Let's make this a better number. Let's make this worth 100 points because I like this assignment. It's fun, and it should be fun for everybody. So, again, it's due on the 16th, which technically you really guys don't need 2 weeks for it. I'm actually going to push this back to the 13th, but I'll leave this 23rd as its date as to which it can be turned in through. Because the sooner you get this done, the sooner... I know it's a lot of fun, but it's also one of those, the sooner you get it done, the sooner it's out of the way, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So let me actually go into modules. Let me remove that. Go into the calendar. That's the wrong class. This one. Delete. Okay, so now that's all not confusing anymore, and there's only one of those. That was left over. I thought I'd gotten rid of all those because that was left over from last semester. That was one of the first assignments that we had back after like spring break when everything went online, and so we were still trying to get used to like transitioning and not sure whether we were actually going back to campus because we kept being told we were going back to campus. So I thought I'd fixed all of those. Apparently not. So my bad. But so now it's just turned into that one place. So if you are only here for the terrain talk, you're free to go. Next week we will be talking about, like I said, let me make sure because I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure we're talking about lighting, shading, and texturing. Oh, you have a full class on that. Lighting, shading, and materials. So, lighting, shading, and texturing. And it's gonna be, I'm gonna try and shove it all into one day. That may or may not work. We'll see. Because it is, again, you guys have an entire class on it, and the reality is that lighting in and of itself could be its own class. Shading could be its own class. Materials could be their own class. Like, there is so much information on all these that it's incredibly overwhelming. But I'm going to try just to give you guys more time to work because I'm trying to give you guys as much time to work as I can on everything. So, yeah. And then the week after that is when we're going to be talking about nap meshes and a little bit about AI. And then after that, it's all going to be optional stuff. And it's going to be working. Like, we're really close to done. So, it's getting to the point that it's a bit scary. But so if you are only here for terrain, you are more than welcome to leave. However, I did say that I would go over how I do timers, because I know that was a question that multiples of you had, and I did want to show you, and I will put up the scripts that I use after I show you how they work. So, I already have a scene built for this. Save. So yeah. So I have this thing that says time remaining. And yeah, have a great day. I have this thing that says time remaining, and when I play it right now, I think I have it on a going up timer, so it doesn't actually make sense. But I have a timer that works up. And believe it or not, you guys basically, the only thing that you don't really know how to do is how to format it like this. What actually would make more sense to you is if I take this one off. And instead let's close all of these. Instead I put the base timer on here. This one 100% is something that you guys can all do. Boop. That's it. So, how does that work? Well, honestly, we've been using time.delta_time since the beginning of time. We've talked about it. And that's all a timer is taking a number that you want for your seconds and subtracting time.delta_time from it every update. Don't even have to use fixed update. You just use update. That's it. That's literally it. Now, to get it to stop at 0, to get it to kind of, stop where you want it to, that gets a little bit more complicated, but not like complicated. Just complicated. And if Unity actually decides to load Visual Studios like it's supposed to, this will be faster than anything else. But I have 4 different versions of a timer to show you guys. And it has to do with like how complex you need your timer to be. And depending on your project, depending on what you're needing a timer for, will depend on whether it's complex or not. And now I have everything hooked up to a text box, but that doesn't mean that you have to have a text box. Maybe you just need your timer to internally count. So you need, after they play for a minute, you want to set a Boolean or you want to increase the speed. So you could have an internal timer without anything else. It's really up to you. So, this one, like I said, it looks a little bit more daunting than what you kind of would think about, but it's actually relatively simple. So, to do it, we create a public variable that says, hey, how much is the time? So what is the time that we're going to set? And we're going to just subtract from that. So it's going to be the time remaining. Now, I have an end time, which is 0, which will generally always be 0, but maybe not. So you could hard code this 0 in, or you could be me and add this extra kind of useless variable in. We have this thing that says timer running. Now, the reason why we have this is because we want to make sure that when we get to 0, we just stay at 0, that we don't go down to -1, which you may have seen a little tick where it went to -1, but then it reset itself to 0. That's just because that's how it worked. So that's what we want our timer. We want to say, hey, while our timer is running, while it's not at 0, do this stuff. But once we get to 0, we don't need to worry about running the timer anymore, because that also keeps your program from having to keep checking to see, hey, do I need to do all this stuff? Is time remaining still greater than end time? No, we just need to check a Boolean value, which is much better for your system. And then we've got the text. So this is the thing. And remember, if you're using text, you need to actually add in unity.ui engine, or unityengine.ui. Wow, I can talk. So we say, hey, in start, we set it up to be yeah, our timer is running. And then in update, the first thing we say is check if the timer is running. If it is running, then what we want it to do is we want it to actually print out, or we want to check if time remaining is greater than whatever, so 0 in general. So is 10 greater than 0 on our first loop? Yeah, it is. If it is, then the time remaining, we subtract time.delta_time. So we subtract the time that is taken between 2 frames. If we are at 0 or less than 0, then that timer needs to stop. And we want to just set time remaining to 0, and we don't really need this, but I had it there just to make sure. So our timer's done. Our timer works. Everything's great. Now if you want to print it out, there's a couple ways to do it. If you're just doing plain seconds, then yeah, it's easy to say, hey, timer.text equals time remaining. But that's going to print partial seconds. Since we're doing this in a float, it's going to print partial seconds. So instead of it being like 10, 9, 8, it's going to be 10, 9.72, 9.33, 9.1, 9.099. Not really what we want, right? We want it to be these full seconds. Now, we could do it where we just like floored out the int, or we can make it so that it's a little bit more expandable. So once we get to bigger number of seconds, or once we start getting into minutes, we can start thinking about how we want to do this. And so that's what this is. So basically this says, hey, we want to print time remaining, and then we want to add to it this massive bit of math. What this says is we want to create a math function. That's what mathf means. Then we want to cast to an int. So we want to take time, and we want to use this funky guy. This is called our modulo operator. And a modulo operator, all it does is it returns the remainder. So in this case, once we get to something like 120 or let's say 110, it's going to actually only show on that timer. It's not going to show that first, let's see, 90, 100, 30, 50. So it's not going to show that first 60 seconds. It's only going to show 50 seconds. And that's because we're just returning the remainder. And this is specifically set up so that when we start using minutes, we can actually have a different one that's like, hey, if the minutes exist, we're going to do a different part, and then we're going to take whatever that remainder is, and that's going to be our seconds. So to do that, we do that math, and then we tell it, I want you to round down. So I want you to round to the nearest int. So in this case, if we're at like 9.999, it's going to go down to 9, and it's only going to read 9. The same way, if we're at 7.1, it's going to go down to 7. And then we just have to tell it to put it to a string. Does that sort of make sense? If it doesn't, for this one specifically, we can just do that. Because we're not having to deal with seconds and minutes, we could just do it that way. Without any care. That would work. Now, one of the problems that you may have noticed, let's tell this not to maximize. Oh my god, come on now. Is if you watch when this times out, generally speaking, game timers don't work the same way as real world timers. I mean, they do, but they don't. Insofar as it doesn't stop immediately when we get to 0. Right now, it stops when we get to -1, because it does a full second for that first one, and down, and then it does a full second for 0. It's not really what we want, right? We want, when we get to 0, when we count to 0, we want 0 to be it, done, finite, nothing else happens. So to do that, we do a very, very slight difference. And so to do that, let's take this again, remove component, add component, text, So to do that, we take a new script. It looks pretty much the same, except we're going to add a 1 to it. So what we're saying is we're going to trick it into displaying one number bigger than what it's actually on. And that's where this begins to get really helpful. Again, if this confuses you, you can 100% drop this for this portion. But eventually, this becomes helpful when we're talking about using minutes and seconds. So this will only work, this part, if you're talking about under 60 seconds. So if you're talking about, like, say you only want to count in seconds, then you're just going to get rid of all that. And now you're going to see what this does instead is it says, hey, yeah, if the time remaining is greater than end time, then display this +1. And oh yeah, if we actually get to 0, make it a 0. That's all this says. That's the only difference. So we come back in over here. And we click play. You're going to see we start with a full second at 10. And we're only going to get down to 0. And as soon as it hits 0, it times out. So can you see how that works a little bit better? Timer 2 works a little bit better than the first timer. Take silence as a yes. Again, I will give you all these scripts so that you can play with them and mess with them. So timer 3. Now, timer 3 is where we introduce something new. Not really new, but we're going to create our own function, which is kind of what I showed you guys to do with the animation assignment. And this is where, for sure, you're going to want to start using this kind of thing. Because what this does is it displays a minute and the seconds. So it displays them all together. So if we come over here, and we go to there, that's still playing, component, layer 3, What you're going to see here is you're going to see we have the 0 zeros and we go down. So this starts to look even more professional as far as if we want a countdown clock. And again, you're going to see that this gets to 1, and so that's kind of a problem, and we want it to actually get down to 0, so we may have to make a couple changes, which would just be saying, you know, we could just take this one here, and we could put it here, and then we could always hard code it in. So that'll automatically switch it over to 0. So again, what this does, and we're going to walk through because this is going to be slightly strange to y'all. You may have seen it in your Java classes, but you may have not. So if we're talking about this is how we control that, you know, it doesn't get to 0 or it doesn't, you know, it stops wrong at 0. Yeah. it stops dropping. So what we could do is we could say, hey, or what we can do to make sure that we're getting minutes and seconds is the first thing we want to do is we're going to create an int. Where again, we're going to make it an integer so that we only have like that single number, and then we're going to round it down. And we're going to say, you know, if the number is bigger than 60, let's go ahead and find out how many times it divides into that. So say we have, I don't know, let's go with 130 seconds. So 130 seconds is 1 minute or 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Following me so far? Okay, so 130 divided by 60 is going to be 2 with the remainder of 10. So what you're going to do is you're going to say, hey, so I want this to be an int and I want to pick it down. So this line right here is only going to come out to that 2. So this would be, you know, 2. And then we're going to take the same number, which is 130, and all we want to know is find out what the remainder is. So what are those numbers that get discarded at the end? We know, because we've already done the division, that that's 10. So this one's going to display 10. Does that sort of make sense? Again, I'm going to take silence, yes. So then we have to format a string to use those numbers. And all we have to do is say, hey, we want to use this kind of format so that this looks like this, and we fill the minutes into this first area, and then the seconds look like this, and we want to fill the seconds into this area. And that's all that is. That's all that means. That says, hey, take this number, put it here, take this number, put it here. So now, when we come over to Unity, because I can remember things. Oh, we're still playing. It's gonna get mad. When we come over to Unity, you're gonna see you know, we've done 10 seconds. Let's make sure that we fix this problem. So yeah, so we fixed the 0 problem. But if we come over here, and like I said, if we say we want 130 seconds, when we click play, we're going to get 2 minutes and 10 seconds. So see how that automatically does that for you? That's pretty cool. So yeah. So now I've shown you how to do a countdown timer. How do you do like a timer that counts up? Well, you literally do the same thing. Instead of subtracting, you add. Who would have thunk, right? So that one is timer 4. And as you can see, all it is current time plus equals time.delta time. That's it. That's how you count up. Okay, are there any questions about timers? Or any questions about anything else that you guys are having problems with or confused about or wanting me to cover next week? Bloop, bloop, bleep, bleep. Okay, I guess I'll take silence as a no. I will put these up post haste as soon as I can. And I will see you guys next week, when we will talk about lighting, shading, and materials. And if you do have any questions, or if you need me to talk about any kind of coding thing, Let me know. That's one of the other reasons why I'm trying to give you guys more time, or only try and do like major lectures on like a Monday or on Tuesdays, so that Thursdays, if you guys need more help, I can actually sit down and do lectures and things on coding things. So yeah. So let me know. Have a wonderful, great weekend. Try not to stay stressed about, what's happening in the US. And I will see you guys next week.